What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the latest film coming from Lionsgate, and that film is called Never Let Go. Directed by Alexandre, this film stars people like Halle, Anthony B. Jenkins, Percy Daggs IV, and more. And before we get too far into this, I have to mention that just a few years ago, I covered a film that had a similar premise to this film, and I thought it was interesting that we had a film now coming out in theaters with a bigger star attached that has obviously a bigger budget attached to it. And just a few years prior, we had a film that had a very similar premise that was a smaller indie production. The film I'm referring to is a film called Tethered, and in that film, it follows a mother and her blind son who have to stay safe in a home that they have in the middle of the woods, and they use a rope so that they don't get too far away from the house, and there's some sort of evil entity in the woods. Similarly, this film follows a mother and her two sons in the middle of the woods in a home that they use as a safe place, and they have to keep themselves tethered to a rope connected to the house so that they do not get taken by the evil that is in the woods. They both have a lot of differences in a lot of ways. They have their own identities, but I thought it was interesting that within a couple of years you have two different films on two different scales in terms of production and the people involved in the film that have a fairly similar premise. So I just thought that was interesting and something I wanted to mention. But today we're here to talk about Never Let Go, and when I saw that the director was the same director who did The Hills Have Eyes remake from early 2000 days, as well as the director of the movie Crawl, I was definitely intrigued to see what this movie was going to be all about. And I think that this film definitely highlights a lot of his strengths when it comes down to tension and overall atmosphere when it comes down to horror films. Then you have Halle Berry in the mix as well, and I was definitely intrigued. She's part of the executive production team in this film, and she's also one of the lead stars of the film. I mean, even if I don't love everything that she's always been in, she's one of those actresses that I grew up watching a ton, so I'm always intrigued to see her in anything, and there's plenty of films she's given phenomenal performances in. And one thing I can start this off by saying is I think that this is an incredibly well-made film that utilizes some great cinematography, has some really strong performances from our three main leads here, especially the two kids who have a lot to do and a lot to say in this film. A lot of the script is really held on their backs, and I think they do a lot to really elevate the material here and give us two solid kid performances. I think we all know that there are some really good kid actors, but there are plenty who also don't make it all that believable. More often than not, a kid performance can go either way, and I'm happy to say that both of the young kids in this film, Anthony B. Jenkins and Percy Daggs IV, both do an incredible job, with I would probably say my standout of the two being Percy Daggs IV. Now, I talked about the base premise a second ago, but let's just get a little bit deeper into it. But I'm not going to say too much because this is a film that is about the intrigue, that is about the surprise, and you going in with as little detail as you possibly can. Movie opens up and we're introduced to Halle Berry's character, a mother of two sons, and they use this home that they're living in the middle of the woods as a safe haven. We learn that this house is a little bit more special than your average house, and so there is an evil that's in the woods, and in order to stay away from that evil or keep the evil away from them, you need to make sure you never let go of the rope which is attached to the house. As long as you are attached to the house in some way, you are safe. And over the course of the film, the kids start to question whether or not this evil their mother speaks of is actually existing out there, whether or not their mom has lost their mind, and as time goes on, more starts to be uncovered when it comes down to this evil and what's in the woods. And I'll leave it at that. There's not an abundance more I want to say without leaning into spoilers. And I thought the premise was interesting. Again, it was hard to not compare it to that film I just covered a few years ago, but the film is able to kind of have its own identity. It wasn't a complete remake or something like that of Tethered. In a lot of ways, it is its own story. And like I said before, I do think this is a very well-made film in a lot of ways. The cinematography is really solid here. The performances are solid throughout, and the film utilizes some pretty beautiful locations that are both beautiful to look at, but also add to the creepy atmosphere of being in the woods, especially in a lot of the scenes during the nighttime. A lot of the film definitely has that eerie, creepy tone to it, and I think a lot of that comes down to what Alexandre was able to bring to the overall look and feel of this film. He definitely brought his horror experience to the overall atmosphere of this film, and I think the performers really elevate these moments and these moments of dialogue with what Alexandre was trying to do. Clearly, there was a good direction of what they wanted this film to feel like, and I think that that's where this film really shines. There are a lot of great creep factor moments in the film that I definitely enjoyed in terms of tone. Outside of that, the film also utilizes really great costume design throughout the design of the overall character outfits as these characters are out in the woods and struggling to find food, and they're not necessarily in a great place. I thought was really solid. It definitely puts you into that world with these characters and gave you an understanding of what they've been dealing with on a day-to-day day-to-day basis. So between the cinematography, the performances, and the rest of the production design, I think you have a really solidly made film here, and a film at times that I thought was almost trying to lean into the idea of parents raising children and making them believe what they want them to believe. At least that's what I thought the film was trying to lean into at a certain point. I'd be very curious to hear what people's takeaways are when it comes down to this film, because on one hand, one of my takeaways about the film was that it is leaning into the idea of being raised with a certain outlook that maybe kind of sets your personal outlook moving forward. Whether or not you should believe that, is it true, is it not? But as the film started to progress, I unfortunately found it to kind of unfold in a very conventional way. In a lot of ways, this felt like a pretty conventional, straightforward horror film that had an interesting premise, that had intrigue and solid performance at the center, but ultimately never really took it to a great level, never really took it to that next level is what I should say. It never really took it somewhere that really felt overly inspired. It kind of felt like the film was starting to lose momentum about 45 minutes in, and by the time we got to the final act of the film, while there are some great moments of performance and production design, I found myself kind of bored with the way that the film wrapped up. It felt very conventional, it felt very predictable, and by the time the movie was over, I was listening to some of the other people who were in the early screening that I was in, just kind of hearing some of their thoughts. There were some people who thought it was cool, but some people who were like, I need an explanation on what just happened. I felt like I followed everything that was going on. I didn't necessarily feel confused, but it is the kind of ending that I could feel maybe has some people go, well, what was the point, or what exactly what they were trying to say there? The movie in a lot of ways just had a really solid idea and all the things that really could have set it up to be a standout horror film in this year, but it ultimately for me just fizzled out into being a conventional horror film with a conventional, predictable ending that came to the credits at the end of the film and just left me kind of shrugging my shoulders. Not a bad film, a very well-made film in a lot of ways, but just something that never really took the narrative in a direction that ever felt inspired or all that interesting, especially when it comes down to rewatching this film. This isn't the kind of film I can see myself rewatching or even wanting to kind of tell people, hey, you gotta go check this out. I love when I can see a horror film that gives me that need or that desire to go and kind of spread the word of mouth of the film. And when it comes down to this film, I wish I could say that it felt like a horror film you need to rush to see. I see this movie maybe doing well with some audience members, and I'm sure it'll do okay on streaming services for maybe a family horror watch on one night, but I can't necessarily see this being a movie that people are going to revisit time and time again in the future. So that's going to be my thoughts on Never Let Go. I wish there was more I could say about this film. There was a lot about it that I think was really working for it, but ultimately it just kind of became another horror film with a pretty conventional, predictable ending. A big thanks to you guys for watching. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more early reviews like this and reviews in general. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.